We're always so focused on adding stuff and doing more instead of just figuring out, do we have to apply certain stress to this person and how much, or is it best that we try to remove or modify things for a certain period of time? So the hard part is not learning all the clinical guidelines, reading the evidence, being a programming ninja. It's all about applying it to the specific individual and their thoughts, their beliefs, their habits, and their early experiences. If we are very effective in our setup and execution, we don't need as much volume. I don't see why a barbell suddenly is this magical thing. It's just a thing we invented. It's just a way to apply external resistance, and it could be an amazing tool, but we also have other things in our toolbox.
Welcome to this new episode. Before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor for the podcast, Moxy Monitor. If you've been following my work, you know that the Moxy is a tool that I use a lot for testing, but also for everyday training and coaching. For those who don't know about the Moxy Monitor yet, it's a NIRS device that measures muscle oxygen saturation and blood volume in real time. It's a non-invasive sensor that is placed on the skin and can be worn during any training or sporting activity. Motocross riders and climbers wear it on their forearms. Hockey players on the ice, swimmers can wear it in water. I've used it to test rugby players, CrossFit athletes, endurance athletes, and more. The Moxy allows you to individualize work and rest periods, optimize load, reps and sets, identify training thresholds in real time, and even correct movement based on what the data shows you. You can also use the Moxy Monitor to determine an athlete's energetic limiting factor and their individual training zones. Using this process, I can now target the athlete's limiter with precision in order to improve their performance without adding unnecessary volume to their program. You can view and collect the data on your Garmin watch and can also pair the Moxy with other physiological testing products such as the VO2 Master, Pnoe, and Cosmed VO2 systems. The Moxy is a product I've been using for many months with great success, and I highly recommend it to any coach who's interested in digging a little bit deeper on the physiological side of health, fitness, or performance. You can use the coupon UPSIDE at checkout for a 5% discount on moxymonitor.com/shop. That's UPSIDE, UPSIDE, for a 5% discount. With that said, let's get into the show. All right, Kasper, we're live on the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. How are you, Sean?
I'm doing well. It's good to have you on. I had Andre on a little while ago, and he had nothing but good things to say about the work that you've been doing with him over the last few months to help him with his strength work. So I thought it might be a great opportunity to learn a bit more about you and what you do, how you do things. So maybe for those who don't know you yet, can you give a little bit of your background?
Yeah, sure. And I'm very glad to be on, by the way. It's a privilege. And but what I am is, I am by profession, I'm a physical therapist, and I work mainly as a personal trainer or strength coach, or what you want to call it, out of my own gym named Nordic Performance Training here in Copenhagen, Denmark. And what I used to do is I used to work in a traditional clinical setting as a physio, but then later transitioned into being a trainer, as I am now, and opening my own facility together with my business partner, where we just basically put everything else on hold in our lives and invested all of our time and money into building an entire business and a gym up from scratch. So, so now I mostly train a combination of primarily general population, actually, clients who wants to gain muscles, get stronger, and feel more resilient, and be physically capable of doing the things they enjoy, and inside and outside of the gym. But just as with Andre, I also have more and more athletes of various levels, and also a lot of other personal trainers who wants to get better in various aspects of the profession, and learn how to attract more clients and turn their PT gig into a full-time profession. So, and also I started to do some online work, which has been great, and something I've actually been working hard to acquire the specific knowledge and the know-how for at least 2 years maybe. And besides that, I live with my beautiful fiance here, and my free time is revolved around training and reading about training and physical therapy literature and so on. So
yeah, so
that's me.
You're a busy guy and you're working on a lot of fronts. I like to hear that. How come you made the switch from physical therapy to coaching? What brought you to that path?
I think there's a lot of factors that came into why we chose to do what we did, but because working in a clinical setting is much more, like here in Denmark, is much more different. Like a traditional clinical setting as a physio is much more different than the job that I wanted to do. So back then I was working with everything from geriatric patients in nursing homes, like complications after knee surgery, and chronic pain patients who have with all the challenges that brings to one life and all that kind of stuff, and doing sports physio with ACL injuries and all that kind of stuff. And so I was used to seeing upwards to maybe 20 different patients a day, and I constantly had to change my approach to not only the specific diagnosis or the physical problem, but more importantly, the person I had in front of me. And even though that really helped sharpen my people skills that I required through that traditional setting, and really I believe that built my foundation as in my everyday practice now as a coach and a trainer. But I wanted to have more time with my clients, and I wanted to focus purely on training. So I had to build some what do you call it? So it's like the name implies, it's training. So it's not, it doesn't say physical therapy anywhere, because everyone has a different opinion on what physical therapy is or what training is and so on. So
what's your opinion on what physical therapy is? How would you define it?
For me, it's about not being the fixer of people's problems, but instead showing them how to help themselves, like being an active listener, providing assurance, and that, like, the hard part about asking that question is physical therapy can be a lot of things, and you can work with a large variety of people. So is it in a sports physical therapy setting, or is it chronic pain, or so but for me, I use training as the tool to help people better themselves, or train specific adaptations that they have to acquire to do the things they like. Yeah, and so I'm actually very glad that I had a lot of years in that field, just to be able to, like, be better at having the initial conversations with clients, like just be good at figuring out what we have to do with this individual, but also what we don't have to do, because we always so focused on adding stuff and doing more instead of just figuring out, do we have to apply certain stress to this person, and how much, or is it best that we try to remove or modify things for a certain period of time, instead of just to help the specific individual in a realistic way, but also, and this is the hard part sometimes, it's living up to the preconceived thoughts and the biases, as we discussed before, and how the training is supposed to be done, or the treatment, or whatever. Because, like, pretty much trying to, and this is hard, it's hard to do the right things according to the evidence and the foundational physiology, and still not clash with the expectations about what needs to be done or what the right approach would be. Because, as you know, when people come through the door, they have been to other physios, chiros, trainers, or whatever, and they have talked to friends and family members who have been to other trainers, and they have read things in magazines or follow someone on Instagram who really shaped their outlook on how one is supposed to be working out, or how you are supposed to receive treatment or whatever. And often people are being told, like, kind of silly, nocebo narratives about how their posture is causing them pain, or how eating carbs is what's making them add body fat, or how training is supposed to be this crazy bootcamp trainings or whatever to reach the goals. And just being able to have the conversations with your patients or clients can be hard, and can be very difficult and very complicated when you first start out as a trainer, if you don't have the experience from working with a lot of people in a clinical setting, if you're fresh out of school and you're ready to apply all your programming skills and all your special exercise techniques and whatnot, and it doesn't get any easier along the way, because if you plan on being a practitioner who tries to stay up with new research, you will constantly be doubting what you're doing and rethinking your approach, because as you know, the more you learn, the more you also realize that there's a lot of things you don't really know that much about. So yeah, and I also think that's why all these systems are starting to become so popular right now. With you have a set of guidelines on how to approach people and train everyone in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had that in physical therapy for as long as I can remember, with treatment systems. That's very much, if this, then you have to do that, and if not this, then you have to do
Like a flow
this
chart.
other thing.
Yeah, it's like
Exactly.
a simplified flow chart. I was having a chat about this with a couple coaches in French about a week ago, and that's what we were saying. If you could flow chart everything, it would mean that we've fully understood the complexity of the human body, and we're so far from it that it's reductionist and almost an insult to say, it's just as simple as if this and that. It's really not, and that's really why, I mean, we exist, and physical therapy on one side, coaches on the other, and then all the other practitioners that revolve around both health and performance. We need all of those people to problem solve around the human body and what's going on. We can't just have a A plus B equals C kind of equation on the paper.
No. Yeah, and unfortunately, that's how a lot of treatment is being done now. But and as you said, we have to embrace that individualized approach and listen to the person in front of us, instead of being so focused on applying our specific systems or our periodization models or our specific movement screens, especially, and whatnot, because that's not the most important thing, or at least it's not the first thing we have to focus on, depending on who the person is. But just being good at listening and understanding and validating people's beliefs, and simultaneously doing the best we can do to follow the clinical guidelines there is, and all the new evidence that's on top of that, and still be in our wheelhouse. So the hard part is not learning all the clinical guidelines, reading the evidence, being a programming ninja. It's all about applying it to the specific individual, and their thoughts, their beliefs, their habits, and their early experiences. So so I think that's what has helped me along the way, on the coaching the human being side of things. As it's humans we are coaching, so learning to ask the right questions, and not be a fixer of people's problems, but being a guide. The name the coach is implying that we are not fixing people, we are helping them to make their own choices and the necessary changes to reach their goals, or maybe put a more realistic goals in front of them, and just learning to be more resilient and live the life they want. And yeah, so that's more on the people side of things. But what especially has helped me also is on the practical side of things. In the training I provide to my clients, I really think working in a setting with very minimal equipment, as you know, when you go to a traditional physio setting, it's not like, very, very rarely it looks like a good strength and conditioning gym. Like and working without equipment has helped me understand and learn ways to progress exercises and modify them specifically to maybe a person who experiences pain in certain movements, or need to build up more specific strength or capacity in specific structures or movement patterns. So even though because I was working as a physical therapist, we really didn't have all those the fancy equipment and the perfect machines and so on, and most physio clinics don't, as far as I know. Even the ones who market themselves as combining strength with traditional physical therapy, whatever that means. As you can see, I had a hard time answering your question in the beginning, because everyone has their definition of what traditional physical therapy is. So yeah.
You talked about the importance of research for yourself and your continuing education. If you think about the last few years, what have been the big maybe changes that you've brought to your practice that were maybe inspired by what you found in the emerging literature in that time?
Most of the literature I read is very physiotherapy based, like pain science and all that kind of stuff, because that I really believe that's what is the foundation of working with people. So so shifting away from the biomedical pain science model and learning how to use a more biopsychosocial point of view on how to help people, and all the good great science that's coming out showing how nociception and pain is not the same.
Can you explain what nociception is for people that don't know what it is?
So that's just if let's say I burn your arm, you get a nociceptive call it
Is it a signal?
you get nociception. It's a signal to the brain, and it has to be you have to before it turns into pain, your brain has to process that nociception. So it can be affected by a large variety of things, and it's so much more complicated than anyone really can explain. And if you listen to the greatest minds or the greatest researchers like O'Sullivan, they all speak about how complex it is. So just as like I mentioned earlier, all your thoughts and beliefs and your previous experience is what is more important than just focusing on the pain signal, is maybe an easier word to work with.
And so from that biopsychosocial model of pain, what can you draw from that research, and how can you integrate that in a coaching practice where you're with someone in the gym? How does that model apply, or how do you apply it? It's obviously going to vary from person to person and day to day, but in the broad lines, how does that model influence the way that you work?
Yeah, but as you said, it's very much individual to the different type of clients, because if you're working with someone like a high-level athlete like Andre, he would never tell you or show you that he's experiencing pain, where others are more hyper-focused on pain and have a different view on what pain is. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it's about learning where the person is coming from. And if they show signs of being afraid of loading stuff, like loading something like the knee, if you have someone with knee pain, and just giving that assurance and finding the right starting point to start to load them up, and use the right words to not make them feel afraid of training, basically. And it doesn't even have to be training. It's what we see is in physical therapy and pain science. This is my understanding, is that 10% is the interaction and 90% is the 90% is the interaction and 10% is intervention. So when it comes to all these specific training stuff and all the execution and the kind of stuff we will talk about later, it's more that's more focused on the load management part and the performance aspect, and not as much as the pain side of things. So people often get a little confused when I am very focused on biomechanics, but still see things from what I believe is a modern pain science point of view. Because on the biomechanical side, I've always been I always liked the programming side and exercise selection side, and knowing how to. I remember early on in our career, I was at a sports physio course with my business partner, and it was about strength and conditioning work. also for athletes. And the course instructor was showing what I remember as being a hip extension from a prone position and standing on all fours. And he asked all the attendees how to make it more biased to glutes or hamstrings or adductors, like moving through different planes and creative active insufficiency over the biarticular muscles, and how tempo changes would affect that, how the load is on the muscle and so on. And we were literally the only ones who could answer those, what I believe to be simple questions, and come up with different modifications to load specific tissues in certain ways, and how to make exercises more stable and all that kind of stuff. So because we're used to finding solutions, because we, instead of following the same boring like principle of a physio guiding every single patient through a machine circuit training or something like that. So and then another thing that has shaped me a lot in the way I work now is I stumbled upon the work that people such as Kasper Vinther and his awesome people at the N1 crew are doing, and that tied very good into how I wanted to do my practice. And they really took practical biomechanics and functional anatomy and combining that with programming and periodization to the next level. So I started applying more and more of that kind of thinking at that periodization model, and had huge success with it. And trainers here in Denmark are starting to notice its practical efficiency, even though a lot of the guys used to mock me about a little bit about the concepts when I spoke to them about it, because it can seem a little, because it's so context based, it can seem very too advanced or too complicated. So I was getting a little bit of critique, and in some instances maybe a little ridiculed a little bit, but these same people are starting to take the same courses now. So I just think that shows that there's something to it, because what it really boils down to is not that doing certain exercises is, in a less biomechanical favorable way, is dangerous in any way, as we know from the literature, and it can still make you stronger. And as I said, literature has on biomechanics have very little influence on pain and injury, and we can see athletes get very strong from doing just only traditional barbell work, and strength training is one of the safest activities you can do, and the injury rate is minimal at best. But learning all these small and big changes in setup and execution and the equipment you use can just make an exercise so much more efficient and feel more comfortable and natural and intuitive to the client, while we're still biasing, us as trainers still know how we are biasing and stretching the tissues we want to a higher degree or in a specific way that we wish to. And at least that's my own experience and the feedback that my clients are giving me, and the results that I believe are showing. So yeah, in terms of tying all this together, it's just becoming better at exercise selection and execution, and combining the practical clinical skills, which are leading up at the new evidence coming out in working with people, and just getting good at creating these therapeutic alliances, as we call it in the physical therapy realm, which you can tie into the coaching process with athletes too. That's what I believe have given me the success I've been fortunate enough to have as a trainer, because when you're working as a full-time trainer and you're starting a business and you're very busy, I at least acknowledge that I will never be on the same level academically like someone like Ben House or Kasper Vinther is on training and nutrition side, and I will never be as know as much about pain size as someone as Gregory Lehman or Peter O'Sullivan. But as a practitioner, I just know that you can get really good at learning and applying knowledge from those kind of people who are expert in the field, in their own field, and then all the science and evidence that are coming out, and using that in a practical setting with your clients, and just accept the fact that you'll never be good enough, and just take criticism for those people, and not be afraid to just start applying and learning and working with people. Because as you see, and I know you talk to a lot of very smart people in the industry, the way they practice to also changes all the nuances. as they are learning. And it's okay to do things that isn't perfect, as long as you do your best. So and I believe that's why I've been lucky to work with a lot of awesome clients and athletes,
Yeah, and
such as Andre.
so far already, and I hope many more to come. So since we're on the topic, let's talk about Andre. Like I said, I was lucky enough to have him on the podcast. As we record this episode, July 30th, going into day 3 of the CrossFit Games, he's currently sitting in 7th position, if I'm not mistaken, after four workouts. So fantastic performance so far, and we really hope that it continues in that direction. So why did Andre come to you in the first place? And I can talk a little bit about that background before we get into the specifics of what you've been doing with him.
Yeah, so I've been following Andre on Instagram for a while, because I used to train his training partner Julian, who's also competing at the games for Team Butcher's Lab.
Mm-hmm.
And I trained his wife, and she showed me his Instagram, and I was very impressed with his strength and his overall athleticism. And then he one day he just contacted me, because he's like Andre is he's very cognitive about what he needs to improve on, instead of just doing the same old things. And he could see from Instagram that I was doing things maybe a little different than what he was used to. So he was just an open book. He just said, I want to get stronger, and I want less irritation from elbows and shoulders, and feel more stable in certain positions, and so on and so on. So we had a lot of focus on from the beginning, just exercise selection and small changes in execution. And then I was responsible for his strength programming and all of his, we just called it bodybuilding, or we don't like calling accessory stuff. We just call it, or Andre calls it bulletproofing, because it makes me feel good. So, but as you know, like exercises and the exercises we choose are very dependent on the goal of the specific workout and the long-term goal. And of course, in general population clients, also to a certain degree, personal preferences, at least in the beginning of working as a trainer and a client. But someone like Andre, just, if I say it, that's what he has to do, he will do it, no matter if he enjoys it or not, because he's an athlete. So his primary goal is very specific performance goal, and gaining strength in certain movements, especially something like compound exercises like barbell squats. And so then, of course, you would have to train that movement and improve the technical efficiency of the lift through repeated exposures and just getting under the bar and practicing. But if we are using Andre as an example, or just a client who's efficient from a coordination perspective, or have the ability to stabilize appropriately, and so on. Let's just keep using the barbell squat as an example. If that person already has done a training program with me or someone else, just by themselves, just like Andre, and they have built up this good neuromuscular coordination in the squat pattern. Basically, what I'm trying to say, if you have a person that knows how to squat efficiently with a barbell, I don't, but what we are seeing when we're looking at the execution is, for example, that the quads are the limiting factor, or quote unquote weak point. Then, then I would have to find a way to load the quads more efficiently outside of the squat. And
how do you determine what needs strengthening and what's limiting a lift? Is that a visual analysis? Do you have some quantification measures that you can apply?
Yeah, as I said, I don't really use movement screens and all that kind of stuff. I don't screen people. We just start training, and then I look at how it's going, how he's doing. And what I saw from his squat videos is that he was shooting the hips back early. He wasn't comfortable in staying in the quads. So for me, it looked like his quad strength was, he has good reactive strength in the bottom, but he had a hard time following that up and just grinding through the lift and accelerating all the way up. So so I had to find a solution, because that's what he hired me for. And and before I go even further, I just want to point out that everyone can squat. If you try to perspectivize this to normal people too, everyone can squat with a barbell, even though it doesn't look like a Olympic weightlifter. It doesn't have to be perfect. There is no more prerequisites than being able to hold the bar on your back, bend down and stand back up, and your nervous system will eventually get better and better at the task. I'm just throwing that in there, because in this day and age, I don't want anyone to see me as someone who is a gatekeeper to people lifting weights in the gym or doing barbell exercises. If that's something they want to try, or maybe that's the only equipment they have available, and so on. But we are speaking purely in the context of someone who has a desire to become very good at squatting and build up their quad specifically, or of course someone who doesn't care about squatting with a bar but wants to train their legs in a simple and effective way, maybe, and their only goals is getting bigger quads. I wouldn't have to use a barbell squat. That's just the point I'm using, because there is better options. So to get stronger quads in Andre, I would have to find a way to really get some intensity out of the squats, and I had to force his nervous system to get better at using his quadriceps more efficiently in the squat. So we used a hack squat, and then we added some leg extensions on top of that. And as you can see, he has made some really huge improvements, and he's just crushing at the games right now. And
can you talk about the improvements he's been able to make on his squat specifically, working with you since he came to you and with the work you've done?
Yeah, just objectively, his numbers have gone up. So for example, at the semi or quarterfinals, they did 4 rep max in front squat. His previous 1 rep max was 170, and I believe he did 177 for 4 reps. And he squat cleaned 170 easy. But there's a lot. And he also improved in other lifts than the quads, but we can go so far down the rabbit hole that it's easy to stay on one topic, being the quads, because there's a lot of nuances to it isn't just maximal strength he has improved. So he as I said, he was very open-minded to my approach right from the beginning, and he's just an amazing athlete, and very humble and hardworking, very down to earth, and I've learned a lot working with him. So if you take it back a little bit, before we go into depth with something like a hack squat and all the techniques we can use on that piece of machinery, he told me a lot about his experiences in his career, and the people he has learned from in the strength training, and the strength training had to be very specific, and his strength work was always programmed in the form of a barbell squat, deadlift, and press, because that's specificity. And this is of course a very general analysis and not a critique to anyone, but this is just my thoughts and my analysis and my reasoning to change what we have been doing. And there isn't anything wrong with barbell compound exercises. They just have to be periodized throughout the training season. If you compete in something like CrossFit, where barbell lifts are an essential part of the sport, but apart from that, they can be very effective for a lot of other things if you want to train more tissue at once or whatever. But what I saw as the quote unquote problem was that to help an athlete like Andre build up his numbers on the squat, the problem what he had been trying previously is get coaching on his squat technique, or maybe switching to a low bar squat or something, and do even more specialized strength cycles with different percentages he had to hit, high frequency, and so on, which are all things we have seen work in the past for professional weightlifters and so on. But Andre isn't a professional weightlifter, he's also a CrossFitter. So even though he would see improvements on the weight on the bar for a period of time before he hit a plateau or he started to run into like problems in his knees and so on, the thing that made the lifts easier and why he could use more weight was probably just the technique changes and the setup, like a lower placement of the bar on their back, and using a wider stance in a more externally rotated position, like making the femurs functionally shorter seen from the side. So the distance he had to travel with the knees would in the sagittal plane would become shorter, so to speak. So which is all great techniques that are used in weightlifting, powerlifting, but and here's the problem, that is that the stimulus and the mechanical tension that he built up in his quads was not higher. If anything, it was lower because the changes in his technique just added more load to the posterior hip muscles and actually onto his spine. So, which again has its time and place if the goal is just to, like the context is to lift a heavy weight, like in powerlifting. But we still got to remember that when an athlete like Andre, he wants to me to make him stronger, and I see that his quad strength is what lacking, then he hired me to make his quads stronger specifically. So not making him more effective from a technique standpoint, because if anything, he could teach me how to squat better, because he has already worked with specialists and he is a specialist. So
and he's done enough squats to like you said, it's not
he maybe done thousands of more squats than I have, and I would like the work that we're doing to transfer to his weightlifting and this upright posture with CrossFit specific movements like thrusters and so on, as we saw like at the games here, and all that extra load he had to stabilize is probably also just more fatiguing from a globally point of view. Like instead of taxing his or stimulating his quads more locally. So when we were looking for,
sorry to cut you off. Do you feel like, and that's maybe a broad and general statement, but do you feel like the rise of CrossFit, together with the movements that are part of the sport and of the discipline as such, like you said, a lot of barbells, a lot of multi-joint exercises, compound lifts, and almost, and I feel like that's coming back, and it's been coming back for a few years, but almost kind of a looking down at bodybuilders and looking down at isolation exercise. Do you feel like is that still a thing in CrossFit, or do you feel like it's getting better? And do you feel like if it is a thing, did it have a negative impact on the sport and development of the athletes within the sport?
It's hard to say, and it probably has its pros and its cons. But and the funny thing is here, I also did a podcast with Ed Haynes, Live, Perform, Compete, where we talked. He's a CrossFitter, and he was very he saw the progress that Andre has been doing, and he was very open to hearing about it, and he started implementing it in his programming too, and we can see a shift in how CrossFitters are starting to train, because everyone, of course, looks up to Andre here in the CrossFit sphere here in Denmark, because he's the best CrossFit athlete we have right now, and so more and more people are doing split squats and glute bridges, and I have more and more CrossFit athlete clients who wants to improve and feel better and isn't locked on any certain way of doing it, and doesn't have that narrow mindset that it's because for me it's not bodybuilding, it's just tools in the toolbox. We're still doing CrossFit, so and when we teach people that if you're looking for specific strength adaptation, I'm showing them and hypertrophy for that matter especially, and I'm showing them in a one-to-one setting or via video how much better options we have than a back squat, especially low bar technique, at this stable environment, and less technical demands, how they can make them stronger. They get it. I think just when we see machines, we think about bodybuilding and we think about intentionally slow contraction and all that kind of stuff, which is something that we are not doing. So
but I mean, again, going back to that argument, and without trying to strawman it, but you look at the average CrossFit gym, there's not that many machines in there. It's not really part of the broad and general culture as such. Like you said, it seems like it's developing more and more in certain pockets, thanks to your work and Andre's. But it's still not a widespread thing that, hey, you have a corner in your CrossFit gym where you have a few pieces of equipment that can supplement all this other work and that are complementary, beneficial, and I would even argue necessary to some extent if you want to cover the full spectrum of what you have to work on.
Yeah, well, I think some CrossFit athletes have been doing it for quite a while actually, because maybe it's their secret weapon. I don't know, because so also Christine Holte, who is sitting at third place, I believe, right now. She came and visited us for 2 years ago when she was in Denmark, just to have a place to train. And what I noticed in her training was that she was doing leg extension and leg curls and a lot of other bodybuilding type movements, or using machines in her training. Like, she spent more time doing machine work than she did doing her workouts and her heavy weightlifting stuff. So, and I think that just like some people misinterpret how modern bodybuilders are doing it, like at the highest level, I think the same applies the other way around. So, and this is just my understanding. I'm not a CrossFit expert in any way or shape or form, but I think that a lot of the best athletes are not doing so many, it's just like CrossFit workouts. They do it hard and intense, and then the rest of the work is much more strength and accessory work, instead of, like, if you go to CrossFit classes, you came in and you come in and you expect it to be very high intense CrossFit workouts. But I don't think that's pure only how the best CrossFit athletes are training, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they need a really broad and strong foundation on top of which they can layer on the intensity and those workouts that are extremely demanding from all aspects of physical capabilities. But if you haven't built, I guess you could talk about a base in terms of all the other qualities. I mean, you listen to Matt now that he's kind of stopped being so secretive about or started to open up about the way that he trains, or that he did train for those years, and you see all the submaximal work that he's been accumulating for months on end, with really quite little intensity as such, or as we maybe conceive of it in CrossFit. And that's and that's part of the reason why he was so good, because he had he spent so much time working on the foundation, that then he could have that pyramid that was higher than everybody else.
Yeah, and he was constantly improving throughout his career. Just as Andre, he made a good Instagram post recently showing how he was combining athlete A with athlete B, where athlete B would see huge improvements very fast, and then would just drop down because of plateaus or injuries or whatever. And athlete A would be more like this small improvements constantly every day, training submaximally and not maxing out unless it's competition time. So even with Andre, I believe he has tested his 1 rep max one time in like squat bench and overhead press outside of competition. And when it's competition time, then he can just add on, because we are still pretty early in his process, and we haven't even gotten to the point where we're training purely for maximal strength, because of how the timing has been in terms of the season and all that kind of stuff. I would like to have a longer periodization, a longer time frame for him to work purely on his strength, because I believe he had the he had the foundation to get those. It wasn't really like fast strength adaptations. It was just tapping into what he was capable of. He just needed to find a way to let his body do it instead of just crashing every time because of too high volume or that kind of stuff. So
it was maybe the low hanging fruit for him, the easiest, not easiest, but the most accessible progress to make. Given that, was it as simple as oh, he wasn't doing that kind of work at all before, and so adding it in, knowing that some amount of it is necessary in order to have to, I don't know, tick all the boxes, if that's even a thing that we want to do. And obviously it's more complicated than that, but is that maybe a gap that you saw in his programming from the get-go, and kind of went in that direction in order to bridge that gap?
He was doing what we could frame as accessory work, but the big problem sometimes is the execution and the setup and the equipment they are using isn't good enough, in my opinion. Because when you're training at that level, when you're training at that level, you have to make sure that everything is lined up. That's where stuff like biomechanics can become more important, such as using a hack squat and modifying it so that that we can get as much volume and intensity out of it without it interfering with the rest of his programming. And what he told me is back before we started working together, they were still doing like dumbbell presses and even biceps curls and that kind of stuff, but it was with no intent. It was just working, just throwing around with the weights. It's just getting it over with 3 sets of 15 and everything. It wasn't really a plan with it. And in the way I see things, we can get strength adaptations and hypertrophy by if we are very effective in our setup and execution, we don't need as much volume. And so he just started to feel a lot better when we applied those sort of things, instead of just doing a lot of junk volume on top of all the crazy volume he was doing. So as I mentioned at the beginning, it's also about just, instead of just doing more, it's just changing the way we're doing it, and actually sometimes doing less. Less is more is a good quote here.
Is a good quote. So how would you, let's think of the bicep curl, because that's something that's simple. Everybody can wrap their head around it. What different ways can you approach the bicep curl? What parameters can you play with in order, like you said, to get the right stimuli to make it so that there's a progression over time? How do you frame it, and then how do you work within that?
So even with like a biceps, which we could call a small muscle group, we can still boost those muscles and make them more, from a neurological perspective, be more efficient at using them, which is important as a CrossFitter for rope climbs and all that kind of stuff. But so like we have 3 muscles that can bend at the elbow joint, and the biceps is a biarticular muscle, so it crosses the elbow and the shoulder joint. So we have to train. If you want to get as much volume in, we can put that volume in different parts of the range of motion by placing the shoulder joint either in flexion or extension. So if I have him doing some kind of elbow flexion movement twice a week, we would most often have something that's done in flexion and something that's done in shoulder extension. And put on top of that, if we are making the exercise even more better from a stability point of view, so throwing in some kind of preacher curl variation, he can get even more out of his biceps or brachialis or radiobrachialis, whatever we're trying to bias the most, with less volume. It's exactly the same as with the hack squat. It's much more precise, it's much more stable, we get much more output from the quads, so he doesn't have to do nearly as much volume. And if we are effective at looking at the string curve and training as much as that, or the resistance profile in an exercise, and matching it so that the string curve is, let's say, if you do a preacher curl, instead of doing it the classical way with the arm in a 45-degree angle towards the floor, we're doing what's called a reverse preacher curl, where he's leaned over so that his upper arm is perpendicular to the floor. So he has to accelerate into the movement, which would be hardest at the midpoint, where he has a 90-degree angle in his elbow, because that's where the weight is heaviest. So he gets better at accelerating into the part where the exercise, where the weight is the heaviest, and he gets weaker from a mechanical point of view, because the muscles are shortening as he is placed in shoulder flexion and elbow flexion at the same time. So just limiting the stability issues, still training that, but if we are doing curls without stability, he has to do a much more volume to get enough stimulus to his elbow flexors, instead of just making it more stable, which is a good thing, because he only has so much volume he can throw in when training for something like the games.
You talked about this at the beginning, the idea of taking things out or not trying to add in, especially for someone like Andre, who, like you said, already has a lot of volume. Are there any parts of his program that you adapted in that way? That are the elements that you actually maybe took out or downregulated for a while in order to maybe simply optimize things on certain parts or volume that he didn't necessarily need?
Well, the cool thing about working with Andre is he told me to make his strength training, and then he would program around that. So that's how we usually are doing it, because he programs entirely for himself, and he programs all of his training for his clients on no shortcuts. So he's very good at programming, and he takes it very seriously. So that just makes it even easier for me.
Is that a rare thing for, sorry to cut you off on that, before, is that a common thing for elite CrossFit athletes to program for themselves? Do you see that often, or is that quite rare?
I think that's quite rare, actually, but he has been working with some of the highest level CrossFit coaches, and he has learned a lot. But he wasn't, I think he was learning a lot, but it wasn't really showing on his where he was in terms of his placement in the open and so on. So he tried applying everything he had known, and he just needed more strength and need to feel better and put on more muscle mass. So he took care of the CrossFit part, and I just had to make him stronger in the right exercises. So everything just clicked. I think it was the perfect time that we started working together. So yeah, but I think it's very rare, and it's very hard mentally as an athlete to also program for yourself. So, but it's been going good. So
yeah,
he's number 7 now.
Yeah, number 7 going into day 2. Yeah, you almost have to. I can only speculate and imagine, because I'm not there. But you would have to compartmentalize so that at sometimes you take the role of the coach and you look at yourself as an athlete and the program and your progress from an outsider's perspective in order to decide what you need and what you don't need, and then you have to go in and execute what you wrote as the athlete, and kind of switch from those two sides, which I can't imagine that being easy.
That's just, it makes it even more impressive that he's at the level he is. But I think it was something he had to do. So yeah, he's an impressive athlete.
Yeah, good.
Nonetheless.
And going back to the question, I'll let you maybe resume your thoughts on the optimizing programming when you started working with him in terms of taking things out. But you said, so you took over the strength, and then he kept going with he programmed the CrossFit around it. Is that something that a lot of your athletes allow you to do? They kind of almost take, I don't want to say the center stage, because it's all very important, obviously, but just have the strength be the foundation, maybe, or the frame, and then put the CrossFit within that?
I believe that it's almost necessary to do if you want to work with me, because I don't have the experience as at programming doing CrossFit programming, because it's as we talked about earlier, you have to stay in your wheelhouse, and so it's if you want my help to get better at the strength and the bodybuilding side, you just have to accept the fact that I make a program and you have to program around it. And I've also had another high-level athlete Frederikke, who is also at Team Butcher's Lab, who are sitting at 10th place, coming out of day one, who had a very good and very experienced CrossFit coach. So that makes things a little bit more complicated, but we saw her strength numbers go up, and she had a lot less pain and irritation and so on from the work we have been doing up to the game. So it can work, but it can be stressful for the athletes if we're not very cognitive about how we are applying all the training on top of each other.
Is that something, do you communicate a lot with the other coaches involved? I mean, with Andre, I guess he's in charge, so you're going directly with him. But do you talk with the other coaches when we talk about CrossFit coaches, maybe weightlifting coaches, or other contributors to someone's program?
I do a little bit, yeah. We just we exchange opinions on how to, for example, as we talked about, I'm very much into using the hack squat for quad strength, but if they don't have a hack squat available where they're training, that's something we have to talk about, how to find the best possible modifications or other exercises to mimic that as much as possible. But I don't have the time to communicate and make all my athletes programs, but also talk with and exchange opinions every day with other coaches. So sometimes it just is what it is, and we just have to do our best. But and as I said, I don't like when Andre he came to me first. He told me he needed like 4 strength sessions of maybe something like 2 hours or 2.5 or 3 hour sessions, and I was like, it's gonna be 50 to 55 minutes tops, 4 times a week, because it's so efficient when we change all this kind of stuff. And so as soon as they realize that, they just see that and they actually feel better after a strength session or a bodybuilding session or like a hypertrophy session or whatever. It's just, they can do their CrossFit work afterwards or before. It isn't that complicated actually. Unless you're doing like sometimes they tell me they've been trying like general volume training or something, and like of course you can do anything productively after doing 10 sets of 10 in squats, for example. But that's just bad programming.
Yeah, and from your perspective and from what you've seen so far with the CrossFit athletes specifically that you've been working with, is there specific times of the year where maybe strength has to take a back seat so that CrossFit can just be the main thing that they dedicate themselves to in training? Or do you still feel that despite the importance of CrossFit as it, being the sport in and of itself that they compete in, do you still think that that strength should remain kind of the skeleton of the program, and then the CrossFit itself being built around it?
Well, I think that if it's a lot easier to like from a local perspective, it's easier to recover from the neurological or the strength training that we're doing. So it's actually pretty easy to apply if they're like sleeping enough and all that kind of stuff, which high level athletes, of course, they are. So it's just a matter of lowering the volume and using efficient exercises. So, for example, as we talked about, if it's quad specific strength I'm programming, then I would just have him come by here once a week and we do hack squat. We only did squat specific work or hack squat once a week, and then he had his weightlifting sessions on top of that. But but like a hack squat is it's performed like it's very quad specific, but it looks very similar to a knee dominant type of squat. So we're still training the squat. It's just much more stable, and it makes it easier for him to focus on the intensity of his contractions, and to a much lesser degree technique and breakdown in his execution. And as we often see when performing complex and unstable exercises like the barbell squat at high intensities, so that would be hard for him to recover from compared to a hack squat. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with lifting heavy barbell back squat, and it's expected to see like changes in technique when going heavy, and having the success criteria being moving a heavy weight from point A to point B within those technical requirements we have set. But the nature of doing barbell back squats or the exercises is just that at high intensities or higher degrees of fatigue, it just makes it impossible to not use other tissues like the glutes, or changing the hip and knee position relative to the load, especially for athletes whose anthropometrics make it difficult to squat knee dominant to begin with. So like people with a femur to tibia ratio, who forces them to fold more over at the hips, or maybe lacking some ankle mobility. So if you imagine someone coming out of the squat shooting their hips back on the way up, so that the bar is loaded, the load on the bar is placed further away from the hip joint and closer to the knee as they're folding over at the hips. So all the most of the volume is being put on his posterior hip muscles, and then the next day we're trying to hit his glutes and his hamstrings or whatever, and his lower back. So he just trains the same thing twice, 2 days in a row, and that's where it becomes a problem. But if we are very specific at when we're hitting, it's very easy to have strength training or hypertrophy training throughout the entire year. It's just a matter of being effective and hitting precisely what we want. So it's just two different tools: the hack squat versus the barbell back squat. And I personally like to look at exercises as tools to achieve the adaptations we're going for, instead of being adapted to one way or the other, or having strength training or not having strength training, like not being emotionally attached to any program or exercise, which sometimes I feel like that's the easy thing to do. And I see maybe some coaches are more in that realm, but yeah, and this is just, we can go very far down the rabbit hole, because there's a lot of other things that are good besides the lesser stability demands and all that kind of stuff. So it's just great having periods in the season where we have other exercises to choose from, instead of the traditional barbell lifts, instead of just not doing strength work. So, and if you imagine someone like Andre, when we're doing the hack squat, we can also use something like accommodating resistance. So we're reverse banding.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off. I was going to say, could you maybe elaborate within that hack squat? Within that hack squat exercise, what parameters do you play with? The tempo, you talked about accommodating resistance, maybe position, emphasis. Can you maybe go a little bit deeper into the hack squat for us?
Sure. So tempo talk, I can take that. We can take that later, but because there's a whole different story. But using accommodating resistance by reverse banding the weight from the top, as well as sometimes you can use a band from the bottom as well to load it on the way up. But if you're placing a band on the top, so imagine there's a band on the top pulling, sitting on the weight. So when you go down, the band would deload the weights in the lower half of the movement, and by doing that, we can make sure that the movement isn't overloaded in the bottom position, where his quadriceps are placed in the what's called the lengthened part of the contractile range, and we also lower the demands from the quads to decelerate the movement, so it doesn't have to contract eccentrically as hard. So those two things combined would be so if we didn't have the band, that would be unfavorable from a mechanical and a stability perspective, and it probably would result in unnecessary high degree of muscle trauma and neural inflammation and that kind of stuff, just making him sore and not being able to perform the rest of the workout or the rest of the week, because he also has to do So he's doing a lot of weightlifting with squat cleans and so on, where he has to catch weight at the bottom. So that's overloaded down there because he's contracting so intense down in the lengthened part. So we can still do strength training, just being very aware that he's doing a whole lot of other stuff down in that part of the range. So and of course the point like being that there's higher demands on his knee joints at the bottom. Again, it's not a problem if you are conditioned to it and you have built up to a sufficient capacity. But again, we have to remember that this is an individual who are training 2-3 times a day, 6 days a week, and in some periods like prepping for the games, he was training for a pretty long period every day, 2 to 3 times a day. So we have to be smart with where we're placing the weight where it's heaviest. And so again, as I spoke to earlier on, placing the resistance in different parts of the contractile range. So and this doesn't only apply to high-level athletes like Andre, because in physical therapy cases where you have someone who is presenting themselves with pain in their knees while squatting, it can be a fantastic way to train the squat pattern and solve some kinesiophobia type issues and build up the capacity slowly without it being too much for them. So, but going back to someone like Andre, I had to make sure that his quads are fresh for the specific workouts he's doing in CrossFit and weightlifting, and it's just a great example of how we can work on strength specific adaptations without interfering with all the other aspects he has to work on, at least as minimally as possible. So and I know a lot of people are maybe thinking that using a band may be like cheating, or I don't know, but it's when you think about it, it's a really smart thing to do, in my opinion, as long as you just load it that much heavier than you would without the reverse band, because it's not making the exercise easier. It's just lighter, or lighter, as some people seem to think, even at a very high high level of like academic level. There are some people who think that it says straight out that it's stupid to reverse band. But if you think about it, it just evens out the resistance profile, and it gives you a heavier weight to accelerate into when you get to the mid-range of the movement where you're strongest. And yeah, people who are much smarter than me, just like Kasper Vinther, has done some calculation showing the specific numbers. So you can see on his, he made a good post on it on Instagram, which makes your head hurt if you read it. So, but it's just, but yeah, it's just a good way to modify the resistance, both with high-level athletes, but also general population. In my opinion, it doesn't, at least when you're helping them and training them, maybe it may be a little difficult to set up on your own, but yeah, but that's just the reverse band side of things. And if you can tie the next element where it was banding it from the bottom, because the band would stretch on the way up, like midway, and give him some more external resistance to accelerate forcefully into. So Andre was really, not really lacking, but the thing he wasn't as efficient at was to accelerate and be able to activate more fibers as he contract his quads harder and harder as soon as the movement were initiated. So he was good at starting strength, and his reactive strength was next level out of the bottom. He was very efficient, but then his ability to continue to recruit like more motor units as he was going up was not as good as we wanted it to be. That was like a low-hanging fruit, as you called it, and having that extra tension from the band and making sure that the weight was heaviest around the middle of the contractile phase, while moving the weight with an intention of accelerating harder and harder. I just tell him to just go as hard as possible, like trying to reach top speeds, even though it's not possible because of the increase of resistance. That just made a night and day difference in how he was able to move a barbell in a traditional like squat, front squat, or thruster, and so on. So yeah, in his squat cleans, as we can see, and his thrusters at the games now. So that's how we used accommodating resistance, and you can also use it in a squat or something like that. But it's just then you're missing the stability part, so it doesn't become so specific for the quads, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think it was a great description of, well, like you said, using just one tool, the band, and how, like, and you explained it really well, the thought process behind it. What does it do from a biomechanical perspective, from a force perspective? And it's pretty exciting to hear you talk about all of this and hear how much progress Andre has done in the time that he's worked with you, and also hearing you say that you haven't even started working on his max strength yet. So I feel like, you know, the best might still be to come, which is quite encouraging. Kasper, I have a couple questions to finish here. The first one is, and I thought about this when we first started talking today. What is the going a little broader here, but what is the general fitness mindset in Denmark from your perspective? How has it changed over the time that you've been coaching, that you've been practicing as a therapist, and where do you see it evolving towards?
Yeah, you can say like everywhere else, we have like of course we have like some different camps of people. Who are you following? Who are the trainers? So in traditional like personal training for general population clients, it's very modern to do power building style training. So very far away from the like the N1 periodization model, where so people, they like to have everything evolved around squat, bench, or deadlifts. So that's you train strength in the beginning, and then you train something in like what they refer to as the hypertrophy range afterwards, and then we'll finish up with some high rep stuff. So and that's what I think Kasim Hansen calls it, the kitchen sink method, where you try to do everything at once. So that's not something I'm a huge fan of, unless of course there's something you like to do.
Mhm.
So when we went to, like we discussed in the beginning with general population clients, it's also important to find something that like personal preferences. But I think often we forget as coaches, we are pretty much shaping those biases that most of our clients has. So a lot of my clients are not doing traditional barbell stuff unless that's what they want to, and we try to do it like in different phases. Um, Whereas if you go to some of the other trainers here in Denmark, you would the clients would almost expect that that they have to do traditional barbell bench press and squats and whatever as their main like A series exercises.
Mhm.
Um, but in my opinion, I don't see why a barbell suddenly is this magical thing. It's just a thing we invented. It's just a way to apply external resistance, and it could be an amazing tool. But we also have other things in our toolbox. Uh, so from that traditional, not traditional, but training, personal training for general population, that's what I see the most. Is everything has to be built around that, and just do progressive overload, and then we have like built in this different hypertrophy stuff, and then some metabolic stress at the end, where I become a very big fan of focusing more on one thing at a time, just because it's also much easier to tell people, hey, this is what we expect, not only from this one workout session, but also what are the adaptations we're going for. What results am I expecting to see? Because if someone comes in and they want to hypertrophy some like just general hypertrophy training, I have to tell them that what we're going for is like more contactile fibers, more mass, and we have to find some way to either they take pictures of or we film them doing the exercises, and we can see that they have gained muscle mass. And if it's strength adaptations we're going for, we have to find some way to see if we're going in the right direction, or if it's cardiovascularly, we have to have. It doesn't have to be very advanced, but just is it easier to take the stairs now, for example?
Mm.
Or if you're doing local metabolic training, you don't get as so much lactate buildup in your quads when you do the stairs, for example.
Mhm.
These easy things, and we combine everything. It's very stressful, and it's very hard for you as a coach to program. because what a lot of my clients get, what they haven't seen before is I would like if I have a anterior day, they only have one exercise for chest and maybe two for quads and a little bit of shoulder work. And when they look at the program, they're like, well, I'm used to doing 5 different exercises for chest. I always start with barbell bench press, and that takes 40 minutes, and then I have all that other stuff afterwards. And you can do that with beginners, of course, because all the things they're doing is not really adding to a lot of overall stress. But as soon as you just get a little bit efficient, it's hard to remain that type of training style. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things I've really learned from diving into something like the N1 courses, that it's a good idea to try to be more specific in what we're trying to achieve. Mm. Also with general population and elite clients.
Yeah, just knowing what you want out of it. And for those who are interested, I had a chat on the podcast with Coach Cass. So go check it out if you're interested in learning more about him and about the whole N1 education and training programs. Kasper, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast today and talk about all the great things that you're doing and working on. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I'm mostly on Instagram. That's just my name followed by an S. So I don't know if you could put it down in the description, the description notes, but yeah. And you can just hit me up on a DM if you have any questions or interested in maybe some online programming or whatever. Or else, it's also our webpage, NordicPerformanceTraining.com. Everything is in Danish, so but feel free to visit our webpage, and yeah, that's probably it. And I'm glad that I had the opportunity to come on because I know you have had a lot of great like big names on the podcast, so it's an honor.
Well, honor was all mine. And again, like you all heard, go check out Kasper's Instagram page. The Nordic Performance Training Instagram is also linked in the description, as well as his website. But if you don't speak Danish, definitely opt for the DM on Instagram. Kasper, it was great talking to you. By the time this podcast comes out, Andre will have finished competing at the CrossFit Games. So we really hope that he does as well, maybe even better than he did in this first day of competition. And again, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you, John.